Joining us now to kick off our final hour of today's show is Congressman Mike Gallagher, Republican of Wisconsin. He is chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. He was an active-duty Marine and was deployed in Iraq for 2 stretches of duty. Congressman, always great to have you here.
Hey, great to be with you guys.
So some pretty big news yesterday, and some folks still digesting it today because there was maybe a little bit of political news you heard about yesterday into today, perhaps hogging some of the spotlight. But on a policy front, particularly foreign policy, you have rolled out a bipartisan bill regarding TikTok and really foreign interference. If you could just describe for us the bill, the bipartisan nature of it, what it would do, and then we can go from there.
Great. So really the bill does 2 things. It recognizes that TikTok poses a national security threat under its current ownership structure, and this has been the warning of every major national security official in this administration and the previous administration. And then it stops app stores and web hosting providers from distributing the TikTok app in the United States unless TikTok severs its ties to the Chinese Communist Party. This is crucial because the messaging from TikTok has been that this bill is an outright ban. That is not true. That is a lie. What we are saying is that if TikTok wants to survive, if it wants to continue to let people post dance videos and this and that, all it has to do is break up with the Chinese Communist Party. There's ample constitutional precedent for that, which gets to the broader principle behind the bill, which is that we are allowing for the forced divestiture of social media applications that are controlled by adversary countries. So the countries that this would involve are China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And that is the result of watching previous efforts to fix this problem be attempted and fail. We've worked together painstakingly, Democrats, Republicans, to arrive at a construct that we think is narrowly focused, that does what we want to do, which is ensure that a hostile foreign power doesn't control the dominant news platform in America, while also avoiding any constitutional issues or a huge grant of authority to the executive branch that could be used against American companies. And that's the final thing I'd say. Nothing in this bill would allow any part of the federal government to go after an American social media company. This is just about countries that are owned, companies that are owned by hostile foreign countries like China.
Yeah, specific foreign countries. So when you talk about severing ties, it sounds like you are offering TikTok here an option, which would be either you sever all of your ties with the Chinese Communist Party as far as the United States is concerned, it's gone, or you're gone. So it's like a ban or severing ties. Is that roughly correct? And what would be satisfactory under this bill to qualify as the ties being sufficiently eliminated?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate explanation. And it's critical because obviously there are a lot of American investors in ByteDance. ByteDance is the parent company that owns TikTok, and ByteDance is the real problem because ByteDance is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. It has CCP members embedded into its corporate governance structure. It's legally, required to comply with CCP political direction. So that's really the issue for the American investors who own part of ByteDance. What do they want? They want TikTok to go public in the U.S., not in like Hong Kong janky market. That's never going to happen under the current ownership structure. So for those who are spending money lobbying against any action, I would submit that this is the best of all worlds for everybody. A complete separation, and this gets to the second part of your question. It would have to have American ownership, and there would have to be a complete cutoff. So you couldn't have engineers that are back in Beijing that are working on the algorithm. There basically be a separation. The algorithm would be transferred to an American company with American engineers, no connection to China at all. And from that point on, there would be TikTok China, which is called Douyin, which, by the way, is already feeding different content to Chinese children. It's feeding largely educational content, and it's there's only a certain amount of time that kids are allowed on it. Meanwhile, they're feeding absolute garbage like anxiety-inducing, depressive garbage to American kids. But there would be a complete separation, and then these two things would just have different lifespans and timelines. And by the way, Americans could then own a part of TikTok if it went public in America. So we think that's the best of all worlds. And I think for TikTok to say there's an outright ban is an outright lie. But also they'll if they're sort of honest behind closed doors, they'll say, well, the CCP wouldn't allow for a sale or a ban. Well, that itself tells you something very important about how the CCP views the app. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like, well, we can't do that because they won't let us. Well, then who are they beholden to? Who's pulling the strings? Who's calling the shots? If it's a CCP, that's the whole problem. So, exactly. Congressman, it's a bipartisan rollout. Talk about that. Who do you have on board here, and how did you forge this consensus given the rancorous, polarized days that we've seen in D.C.?
Well, we have 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans as original co-sponsors. We want an even number. I won't name them all, but I'll give you just a flavor of just sort of it's all across the ideological spectrum. So on the Republican side, you have myself, you have, very conservative members like Chip Roy, you have moderate members like Dusty Johnson, you have members of ENC like Kat Kamek, Bob Latta, and on the Democratic side, my ranking member, Raja Krishnamurthy, you have Mikey Sherrill from New Jersey, and you have Richie Torres. So we have a great cross-section of members. And I have to say that the White House statement yesterday was very constructive. They effectively endorsed the bill. We've taken the technical assistance provided by the administration. We've used it to refine the bill and make it better. And I would just say this is kind of how Congress is supposed to work. It's not, nothing happens quickly, but we've spent the past year learning from the failure of previous efforts, refining our approach, trying to arrive at something that Democrats and Republicans, the legislative branch and the executive branch can all get behind. Because while it may seem very simple, right? Okay, we have an app that's super influential. It's owned by a Chinese company that's beholden to the CCP, our foremost adversary. It's a very complicated issue legislatively in terms of precedent. It's bound up in this bigger issue of cross-border data flow. So we try to take a very careful, deliberate approach. And finally, I would just say shout out to Kathy McMorris Rogers and the Energy and Commerce Committee, who have worked with us hand in glove and who will be marking up the bill tomorrow. They've been incredibly constructive, and I'm very pleased with where we've landed so far.
A couple more things on this. Number one, I can anticipate some objection about potential mission creep, First Amendment, and Congress starting to infringe in other areas. You're saying, nope, bright line, it's cordoned off, it's only for this type of company that would be controlled and owned by these specific adversarial countries. But some people might say, well, what about the First Amendment? What about American users? What about all of that? Fair concerns. What's the response?
Yeah, we've tried to, really embrace those concerns, not dismiss them, and write a bill that's sensitive to them. I would say it's about ensuring divestment, not censorship. So if an entity other than the CCP owns TikTok, Americans can still share their weird dance moves. They'll have the same freedom of expression. But what they'll also have is freedom of thought rather than the manipulation of content via a Communist Party algorithm that currently exists. So it would be the same freedom of speech with restored freedom of thought. Also, sometimes in antitrust cases, it requires a company to have ownership structures changed. Indeed, people are talking about doing that for social media companies in America right now. No one has ever claimed in those conversations that altering an ownership structure of a platform equals stifling the free speech of its users. And that's really the absurdity here for that claim, equating company ownership structure of what happens to the platforms that facilitate speech with crackdown of the speech itself. The ownership is Chinese, the speech is American, and everybody else is. So this is about the former, not the latter. And by the illogic of TikTok's argument, the breakup of Bell in the 1980s would have been one of the most monumental anti-First Amendment events in American history, but of course it wasn't.
Then there's the matter of the manipulation that you described a moment ago. I know that with TikTok, there's been a conversation around data security and what the Chinese government might be amassing in terms of intelligence on tens of millions of Americans, including young people. I think just as concerning, if not more concerning, is their ability, at least theoretically, to put their thumb on the scale and force feed many, many young Americans any number of different messages on family, on marriage, on the goodness and righteousness of America as a country, on ideology, on foreign conflicts. And you can imagine them maybe dialing up in certain ways or dialing down depending on the moment geopolitically. If it's really suiting China's needs or their interests, they could start pumping a lot of dangerous stuff into these feeds on TikTok if they control that company. Is that a theoretical concern? Or, I know you look at a lot of intelligence, there's probably only so much you can tell us. Are there concrete examples that the Chinese government is already doing this?
Well, I could tell you, Guy, but then I'd have to kill you, and I can't have another unsanctioned murder on my hands.
Yeah, then you'll really have to leave Congress.
Exactly. There's no more room for these bodies to be buried. I'm not completely lost. My train of thought. I actually think the concern about their ability to manipulate the information we get or the news kids get, or even our sense of national identity, in my mind, that's the bigger concern. The data privacy, the tracking of your screen activity, all of your activity, that's a concern, sort of the espionage component. But instantiating TikTok as a dominant media platform is the bigger platform.
Yeah, the propaganda concern. But I guess my question is less about, is it a concern? We all agree it's a concern. Even Democrats, Republicans, it seems to be a consensus that's a concern. My question again, is it beyond a concern? Is it a reality that needs to be responded to urgently, or is it something that might happen in the future?
It is a reality. By TikTok's own metrics, TikTok, when defending themselves against this claim, said, "We'll just compare our hashtag posts to what you find on Instagram." An outside analysis done by experts comparing certain hashtags that are unfriendly to the CCP, in as much as you can do an apples-to-apples comparison between TikTok and Instagram, because these platforms are quite different in ways, show disparities in content that don't make any sense other than they're suppressing content that the CCP won't like. The other thing I think we could all agree upon is, even if you think they aren't manipulating content currently, certainly the Chinese Communist Party would take advantage of an opportunity to pit Americans against Americans. And so they have the intent. This app gives them the capability. It would be malpractice or an act of national self-sabotage or suicide to just hope that they'll be nice and not weaponize the platform in the future. It's just a risk we can't take.
I just alluded to it jokingly, but it's actually quite a serious decision that you've made in your life, in your career, to leave Congress, to not seek re-election in Wisconsin this year, and therefore when the Congress expires and a new one takes over in 2025, you will not be a part of it. I was taken aback, I'll admit, by that news when it broke a number of weeks ago. I want to ask you about it when we come back. Mike Gallagher on The Guy Benson Show. Republican Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher, our guest here on The Guy Benson Show. It is the happy hour. And I started to talk about this right before the break. Congressman will not seek re-election this year. He's going to bow out. And I have to admit that when the press release dropped into my Twitter feed, Congressman, I was just shocked. I didn't see that coming. I didn't know it was coming. And on a personal level, I was disappointed because you and I have gotten to know each other. I think you are someone who does a really good, serious job in Congress, and there's not a ton of that these days. So this is the first time we've spoken on the air since that announcement was made. I'm sure we will probably do some more retrospectives in the days and months to come. But since I have you here, what went into this decision? Because I think for a lot of people, this is kind of a red flag. Here's a young, productive, ascendant, influential member of Congress just walking away from it all. If you want to just address that as you feel comfortable, I'd be fascinated to hear.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just turned 40, Guy, and I realized I have 40 more years until I could run for president. So what's the point? You know what I mean? You got to be 80 nowadays. On a serious note, the predominant variable is just my family. As a new parent yourself, you'll appreciate we have 2 young kids. We want to have more, and this lifestyle is pretty brutal for a young family, and that just has to take priority right now for us. That is my most important mission is building this family. My second most important mission is beating the Chinese Communist Party, but the former outweighs the latter, or you could say they're linked. The second is I've always had in mind that one should serve for, let's say, a decade and then go back home. I think that was the model the framers had in mind, and I've just seen too many people stay for 20, 30 years, and I do think that careerism is at the heart of the sort of corrosion of the modern Congress, and I didn't want to contribute to that. And then maybe on a selfish and more practical level, there's other interests I have that I want to pursue, and I've really had the best job in Congress, which is chairing this committee. And the idea of then returning to be a rank and file member, or having to play a 4-year game to be another committee chair, wasn't as appealing to me as maybe doing something different before I sort of become the career politician that I was inveighing against when I first ran 8 years ago.
Would you consider returning into the fray at some point down the line, or are you basically done?
No, absolutely. I mean, public service is always going to be in my blood. I mean, I joined the Marine Corps when I graduated college. I've been doing it nonstop for 15 years. I am all about national security, defense, and public service, and I would like to be at a point, both in terms of my personal life and just professional opportunity, where I could keep doing stints of service, either in elected office or in an appointed position, and I'd like a career that balances the two. And so that's going to remain my passion, and I hope I have the opportunity to get back into the fray. Furthermore, I would say I don't intend to leave the fray. I just intend to attack it from a slightly different direction. Inevitably, what I do in the private sector will be an extension of what I do now, which is trying to defend America from the bad guys out there that are trying to destroy us.
A conversation to be continued on and off the air, I'm sure. Congressman Mike Gallagher, chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, our guest here on the Guy Benson Show on this Wednesday. Congressman, thanks so much. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, sir.